Welcome to our forum on the future of research universities. We're thrilled to be joined by William Kirwan, Chancellor of the University System of Maryland. Thank you so much, Brit, for coming and joining us today. We organized this event because it is an exciting and challenging time to talk about what lies ahead for the country's research universities, and we are the backbone of American innovation. Our world is built on the work of our research faculty. Most of U.S. basic research and a growing share of all research is conducted right here on our campuses. And yet, as you know, that work has been imperiled, with sequestration forcing deep cuts into critical research programs. Last month, Chancellor Kirwan and other leaders met with Congress and members of Congress and urged them to end the sequester. Now, given the budget deal that was put on the table last night, we probably owe you, Brit, a round of thanks. So we're almost now, but it's not over till it's over. I understand that. And yet, despite these challenges and others, we also know it's an exciting time to talk about the future of research universities, especially this one right here in Delaware. We just opened, and we were just showing Brit Ice Lab. We walked by it. We opened that last month. Next month, we'll open the Health Sciences Complex. We're investing heavily in our research future and the people who will drive it. As we prepare for the next round of strategic planning, we'll be looking for ways to strengthen our research enterprise, to translate our scholarship into solutions with impact, and to innovate how we train students who will sustain this critical legacy. And that's why we asked the Chancellor to join us today. He's a nationally recognized authority on critical issues shaping higher education: cost containment, economic impact, access and affordability, equity, and inclusion. Chancellor Kirwan leads the 12 institutions and 2 regional centers that make up the University System of Maryland. He spent 24 years on the Maryland faculty, then served 10 years as president of the University of Maryland College Park. Brit left Maryland for a few years to serve as president of Ohio State University, but he returned in 2002 to become chancellor of USM. His long experience in higher education and deep involvement in federal policymaking have made him a leader among his colleagues and a trusted advisor to our nation's top officials. He chairs the National Research Council's Board on Higher Education and Workforce, as well as the advisory committee of the College Board's Advocacy and Policy Center. He co-chairs the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. He serves on the Business Higher Education Forum and the National Commission on College and University Board Governance. He counsels the U.S. Secretary of Education on issues of certification and accreditation as part of the National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality and Integrity. Chancellor Kirwan's distinguished record of service and accomplishment have been recognized with some of higher education's most prestigious awards, including the TIAA-CREF-Hesburgh Award for Leadership Excellence and the Carnegie Corporation Leadership Award, honoring his commitment to undergraduate education and community engagement. We are deeply honored that he is with us today to share his perspective and expertise. And I know he'll spark a lot of conversation, and that's the whole point of this, to start a lot of conversation as we begin to write UD's next chapter. Please help me welcome Chancellor William Kirwan.
Pat, thank you so very much for that very nice introduction. As someone once said, it's the kind of introduction my father would have appreciated, but only my mother would have believed. To that I can add, I'm very glad my big brother and older brother, I want to emphasize, was present to hear that introduction. I'm especially pleased to be here at the University of Delaware because I have all sorts of connections to this university that probably most of you don't know anything about. Of course, my dear brother is a recently retired, but still working, UniDel professor. But my thesis advisor, Malcolm Robertson, I got my PhD in mathematics at Rutgers, and Malcolm Robertson left Rutgers many, many years ago in the 60s and came here to assume a chair professorship in the mathematics department. And 2 of my fellow PhD students, Richard Libera and Al Livingston, maybe some of the veterans here know those 2 names. They're longtime faculty members here, but they were graduate students with me at Rutgers. And David Rozelle, your past president, was my office mate and fellow poker player when we were young assistant professors in the math department, I was invited to chair the Middle States accreditation of this institution some years back, and I'm very proud of the fact that the University of Delaware and the University System of Maryland are partners in a major NSF grant aimed at bringing climate change and sustainability, bringing a curriculum on climate change and sustainability into the K through 12 schools, both in Maryland and in Delaware. So I feel great connection to this university, and I have deep admiration for the work that goes on here. As I understand it, and Pat just made this clear, the university is at the beginning stages of a strategic planning process, and I've been asked to talk about my perspective on some of the big issues facing higher education, issues that you may want to consider as you develop this plan. However, in talking about the future and trying to make some intelligent comments about it, about the future, I do recall the immortal words of that great philosopher Yogi Berra, who said, "It's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future, but I will do my best." So with that, let me just say that I will speak for a bit and then hope to leave time at the end in case you have comments on something I've said or questions you want to ask of me. And I certainly hope to use this time to learn from you, as well as I hope I can say some things that might be helpful to you. Pat described the University System of Maryland, where I currently have responsibilities of leading, and as I remember from my days as president of College Park, when trying to recruit the best possible students that we could get to come to College Park, Delaware was one of our big competitors. We were both fighting to get those bright students from New Jersey. And fortunately, there were enough of them that I think both were able to succeed. So let me turn to today's topic. And I feel that the report issued last year by the National Academies entitled Research Universities and the Future of America, 10 Breakthrough Actions Vital to Our Nation's Prosperity and Security. I think this report provides a useful framework for our discussion, because it is, after all, a report talking about what should research universities be focused on as we look to the future. Pat mentioned that I chair the board, the National Academies Board on Higher Education and the Workforce, and in some sense, this report was done under the auspices of that particular board. So I had a chance to contribute in some small ways to the report, which sought to build upon the Rising Above the Gathering Storm, the landmark study of U.S. competitiveness conducted a few years earlier. And incidentally, the chair of this commission, that, as you probably know, was the former CEO of DuPont. I think he just stepped down. Yeah, yes. But for the purposes, I mentioned 10 breakthrough strategies. For the purposes of this conversation, however, I want to focus on just 3 of the recommendations. The other 7 recommendations are important, but are not unexpected, and are largely issues that are out of our direct control. They include such things as a call for greater research funding. Well, we're all for that, but we're not going to make that happen. Payment for the full cost of doing federal research. Great idea, but don't hold your breath. And a decrease in burdensome federal regulations and reporting, something we would all welcome. But the 3 recommendations I want to focus on today, however, are the 3 in the report that I believe are at the heart of some of higher education's greatest challenges as we look to the future, and especially our research universities. In addition, as I say, I think these 3 require actions that, for the most part, are within our control. As I work through each of these three recommendations, so you can keep time on me here, when I get to the third one, you'll know we're almost done. I will sort of introduce the recommendation, talk a bit about the big picture, issues that drive it, and then say a little bit about what we in Maryland are doing to respond to that particular recommendation. And during the discussion, I would love to hear some thoughts about that you may have on these recommendations. So I'm going to begin with recommendation 4, and it says basically, universities must increase cost effectiveness and productivity in order to provide a greater return on investment for taxpayers, philanthropists, corporations, foundations, and other research sponsors. Now, this isn't a recommendation written by the Wall Street Journal. This is a recommendation written by, important national business leaders for sure, but some of the smartest, most distinguished faculty and university administrators in America. And why would they write such a recommendation? Well, I think we're all aware of the enormous cost pressures impacting higher education. State support for public universities, and Pat was just regaling me with the fact that the good news and bad news about Delaware is you don't get a lot of state support, but that means you don't get a lot of cut. There is an upside there. But state support for public universities on a per-student basis has been declining for decades and was at its lowest level in 25 years before the Great Recession hit. Regrettably, the situation has only gotten worse. Over the past 5 years, there's been a 25% decline in state support on a per FTE basis across the country. And let's face it, with no dramatic prospect for turnaround in the near future. So what have universities done to compensate for this egregious loss of state support? They've raised tuition. Universities have quite naturally gone to the tuition revenue stream, but the budget hole created by the drop in state support is so large, tuition has grown at rates that are simply unsustainable. We have to face that fact. As the Washington Post reported last year, since 2008, adjusted for inflation, the average tuition increase at public universities in the United States is 27%, with public universities in some states experiencing increases of more than 70%. In actual dollars, the average increase across the country over that period of time is about 40% in actual dollars. So not surprisingly, tuition increases at these rates have caused a strong public backlash as student debt upon graduation rises ever higher. A report just out from the Institute for College Access and Success says that student debt jumped 10% last year alone. Last year, 10%, to nearly $30,000. Now, I would still argue that acquiring $30,000 of debt to get a college degree is still a good bargain. But if you look at the trend line, you have to be worried about where it's headed. Incidentally, the state with the highest student debt in the nation is none other than Delaware. But I hasten to add, that's the bad news, that's not graduates of the University of Delaware, but graduates whose home residence is in Delaware. At the same time, as we've had this increase in tuition and all the political angst that's caused, the importance of college access and completion has obviously moved to the forefront of our national education conversation, with special emphasis on more graduates in the STEM disciplines. Technology, engineering, and you know what STEM is. A telling point of where we've gotten to in our country is that a couple of decades ago, we ranked number 1 in the proportion of adults with a 2- or 4-year degree in the world. We ranked number 1. Today, we rank 13th. Another telling data point is that in 1975, the U.S. and Japan had the highest proportion of 24-year-olds in their populations with a bachelor's degree in a STEM discipline. We were number one, tied with Japan. Today, we rank 13th in that proportion. So President Obama has set a national goal of recapturing leadership in college completion. And all sorts of people have come forth in support of that agenda. The Gates Foundation, the Lumina Foundation, many other major foundations, all talking about and emphasizing more access and more college completion, not only as a competitive issue for the United States, but also, as I'll talk about in just a moment, a social equity issue in the United States. The National Governors Association a few years ago embraced college completion as its #1 goal. So this brings us to a challenging bottom line. If we in higher education are to meet our responsibilities to the nation, we're going to have to demonstrate a firm commitment to act as cost-conscious stewards of the funds and find more cost-effective ways of delivering high-quality instruction and education to our students. It just, if you look at it, the dynamics of this situation, unlikely that public funding is going to rise dramatically. Tuition, we've played that card, basically. We need to educate more students. We need to educate them well. It's in mathematics, we would call this an over-constrained problem. So what are we to do as institutions? And I would say most institutions have found ways to produce administrative savings through energy conservation, purchasing consortia, I bet you're in a purchasing consortia, and better procurement practices. And this is an area where we in the system have been particularly aggressive, but I won't go into that side of the equation of our activities. But what I would say is that on the administrative side of the house, and I'm sure some faculty might not agree with this, but on the administrative side of the house, with one exception, I rather doubt there's much more our institutions can do to gain substantial savings in it from administrative operations. This one exception is cloud computing. Now, this is an area of expertise that I don't have, cloud computing. So I'm not going to regale you with all the virtues of cloud computing. But I will say this. I happen to sit on the board of Internet 2. And from presentations to the board, I believe considerable cost reductions in administrative computing could be in the offing. On the board with me of Internet 2 is the CFO of Caltech. And so I asked him an innocent question, what is Caltech doing about cloud computing? Is it you see it as playing a big role in your future? And I figured if it was going to happen at Caltech, if it was going to happen anywhere, it's going to happen at Caltech if it was a good thing. And I was overwhelmed, not overwhelmed, but impressed by his response. And he said, absolutely, that it is the future of administrative computing. And he said, basically, they operate with legacy systems. And he said, we are going to drive those legacy systems into the ground, waiting for the right applications to come along in cloud computing, because we see the administrative computing side and probably the academic side moving to the cloud. But with this one possible exception, as we look to the future, the tension between providing education to more Americans and the necessary resources to do so can, in my opinion, only be resolved by finding lower cost means of delivering high quality education. Now, a decade ago, I would have said this concept is an oxymoron. The association of quality with rates of expenditures is in the DNA of those of us in higher education. But in the face of mounting evidence, I'm becoming convinced that high quality and lower delivery costs may just be possible. What has changed my mind? It is the confluence of rapidly advancing knowledge and capabilities in three areas: the power and adaptability of modern intelligent software, the ubiquitous nature of the internet, and the incredible advances in the cognitive sciences. We actually know now what triggers the imprint of information on the brain. And armed with that fact and the power of software, we can create new adaptive learning platforms with software-enabled intelligent tutors, all informed by advances in the learning sciences. I think this could be, if not a game changer for higher education, at least a means of supporting lower cost, high quality instruction in many disciplines. I must stress, I do not believe technology represents some sort of magic bullet to fix all the ills of cost and quality in undergraduate education. And I certainly am not suggesting that higher education should cast aside all aspects of the traditional approach and buy into the latest fads. That would be an enormous, enormous mistake. At the same time, I've become convinced that the thoughtful and strategic use of technology in higher education has the potential to improve outcomes while reducing costs. I also believe that as we enter this brave new world, we must study carefully and fully evaluate innovations in instructional delivery to ensure they have the desired effect, namely improve learning at the same or reduced cost before they are brought to scale. Several universities who've been mentioned in the paper of late have failed to follow this approach and chose to just, on a broad-scale basis, implement some of these new strategies, and with unfortunate results. Just as in any other area of human endeavor, some innovations in teaching and learning will work, others will not. Thus, a careful research-based approach must be followed, and that's what we're doing within the University System of Maryland. Let me just briefly describe some of our efforts in this area. 6 or 7 years ago, we implemented what we call course redesign projects across the system using the National Center for Academic Transformation model. Carol Twigg may be a name some of you know. So some of you are probably familiar with this approach. Basically, the idea is it transforms large, lecture-heavy general education courses, primarily in the sciences, into active learning, technology-enhanced classes with fewer formal lectures, online modules, and in many cases, intelligent software-driven tutors. Pat was telling me about some of the things you're doing in your new teaching center here that are very much aligned with that. We first tested pilot sections of courses using these strategies, and once we found the strategies that improve student outcomes at lower or reduced cost, we implemented them on a large-scale basis. All told, we've redesigned some 85 courses across the system, enrolling more than 25,000 students. And in every case, we can document improved student learning and at no increased cost, and in most cases, an actual reduction in cost. We've also partnered with Carnegie Mellon University and its Open Learning Initiative. Those of you who don't know about OLI, I urge you to go on the web and look it up. OLI was an early mover in these new strategies, and what they did very thoughtfully was to bring together disciplinary experts with cognitive scientists to develop sophisticated software-driven learning platforms. Then they conducted controlled experiments, having some students taking traditional classes, meeting 3 times a week with the lecture sections, and others using the new learning platforms and 1 or 2 times a week discussion, not lecture sessions. In essentially every case, the innovations produced by OLI at Carnegie Mellon outperformed the traditional sections. Currently, we're involved in, so we are in a partnership with OLI and using some of their teaching and learning platforms. We're also involved in a comprehensive study of MOOCs, massive open online courses, in partnership with Coursera and Ithaca, which is a not-for-profit organization in New York City dedicated to the use of information technology to advance higher education. We have a significant grant from the Gates Foundation. And what we're doing is we are exploring whether or not the use of a Coursera a MOOC can, as a learning platform in a traditional classroom setting, can improve learning outcomes at the same or reduced cost. So we're running 12 side-by-side comparisons. Some sections are being taught using this MOOC, some in traditional way. Students will take the same final. We'll look at the results. And we'll be reporting on this sometime in June. I personally am so committed to the potential in this area that we've created a center within the system, the Center for Innovation and Excellence in Learning and Teaching. And it is to help promote, assess, do research on, analyze results, and find funds to support our efforts in this regard. So let me just close out this section by saying that while I believe there's, that I genuinely believe there is potential in course redesign, hybrid classrooms, flipped classroom, MOOCs, and other elements of academic transformation, I want to reiterate that we must proceed in a thoughtful manner, guided by evidence, not by hope or hype. But with these words of caution, I think it is imperative that higher education, especially our research universities, engage in using technology to find lower cost means of delivering high quality education. Because quite frankly, if we are unable to do so, given the fiscal circumstances we're likely to face for years to come, I simply don't see how we will be able to get to meet the education goals our nation needs so badly to achieve. Now let me move to another recommendation in the report, recommendation 3, which says that the role of business in the research partnership should be strengthened, facilitating the transfer of knowledge, ideas, and technology to society, and accelerating time to innovation in order to achieve our national goals. Now, again, you got to remember that this is a report influenced greatly by the National Academy of Sciences, and but it's sending a very clear signal about the a future direction for our research universities. Now, I happen to believe that this is an area where University of Delaware has already carved out a significant niche. But the two developments have occurred that make this recommendation especially important for our research universities in our nation. First, as the National Academy's report notes, business and industry have dismantled the large corporate research laboratories, such as Bell Labs, the research centers at RCA, IBM, and at other major corporations, which drove much of American innovation leadership throughout the 20th century. These labs are no more, or at least not with the capacity they possessed in their heyday. Secondly, given the shortened time between discovery and application in many areas of university-based research today, such as pharmacology, biomedical engineering, telecommunications, and IT, our research universities are playing an increasingly important role in building our nation's innovation economy. I see this as a very positive thing. However, the interface between most of our research universities and the private sector still needs work, a lot of work, if we are to take full advantage of the new knowledge and ideas emerging from university research, ideas which are needed by society today more than ever. In order to build sustained collaboration between research universities and the business community on a larger scale, the dynamic between business and higher education needs to be rethought. Rather than the traditional customer-supplier relationship in which universities provide trained workers and license intellectual property to businesses, we need to develop a more peer-to-peer relationship. As I see it, this transformation needs to take place on two fronts. First, businesses and universities must place a premium on a collaborative approach to innovation and commercialization with incentives for both parties to support and foster these priorities. Second, universities must make the modest investments necessary to build the infrastructure required to properly manage intellectual property and facilitate technology transfer. Obviously, what the National Academy Report is calling for here is not, underline not, a retreat from basic research. That would be disastrous, and the full report makes that very clear. It's not even calling for a new direction, but rather increased emphasis on efforts that have been evolving for some time. Indeed, over the past 30 years, universities across the country have established licensing offices to facilitate tech transfer, put research to practical use, created new companies from intellectual property, and partnered with established companies on the development of new products and services. But universities have uneven capabilities in the area of technology transfer. In addition, there's a need for a streamlined licensing negotiations with industry. And there's a need for greater stakeholder involvement and accountability as we move through the patenting, licensing, transfer, and commercialization process. The National Academies report actually calls for a universal intellectual property policies that are simplified, streamlined, and standardized across higher education so that negotiations between industry and university can move forward according to commonly accepted practices. I think given the differences in our the missions and the difficulty in getting agreement on such a broad universal policy make it impractical, at least in the short run. But I certainly believe that the development of best practices for universities in this area it is an important thing for us to do. It is certainly this emphasis on trying to bring more university-based research where appropriate to the market is a very strong commitment within the university system of Maryland. In support of this greater so-called translational research, our Board of Regents recently created a new committee, the Committee on Technology Transfer and Commercialization. This committee provides oversight and support for campus-based technology transfer and commercialization activities and brings board-level accountability for results. Just recently, the board expanded the criteria for promotion and tenure to include activities involving the creation of intellectual property and technology transfer as a means of encouraging and rewarding a more entrepreneurial culture among those faculty so inclined. Not required of everybody, but for those faculty so inclined, it is an area of activity that is now included in the promotion and tenure portfolio. 2 years ago, the system, I worked closely with the governor to create Invest Maryland, an $85 million venture capital fund. It was funded by an auction on corporate tax credits, very creative financing strategy. And the fund provides early-stage capital for investment in young, high-tech companies in the life sciences, information technologies, and green energy. Last year, we again worked with the governor to create Innovate Maryland, an initiative that brings together and provides infrastructure funding for Maryland's universities, its federal labs, and business community to advance technology transfer efforts. These two programs work in tandem, allowing the system to take much better advantage of the technical and scientific talent, enabling the system to advance Maryland's innovation economy. Last year, we established a single technology transfer and commercialization operation called Ventures for our 3 research universities, University of Maryland College Park, University of Maryland Baltimore, and University of Maryland Baltimore County. This new operation provides uniformed licensing and patenting services and joint marketing to the business community to increase efficiency and productivity. In addition to the usual staff in this operation, Ventures, this technology transfer operation, has appointed 8 professionals we call site miners. These are individuals with scientific and entrepreneurial experiences, And these site miners walk the labs, the offices. You know, they know what might have commercial application. They talk to faculty, trying to identify ideas under development at the university that could have commercial application. And it seems to be paying off. Over the last 18 months, we've launched some 35 companies based on university-generated intellectual property. Let me conclude my comments on this recommendation with a caveat. As I noted, these efforts are not intended to de-emphasize basic research, which is the seed corn of future innovation. Rather, they are intended as a complement. Second, there are obviously risks as universities engage in technology transfer and commercialization. This should not be done in the absence of clear, well-distributed, and carefully monitored policies on conflict of interest and conflict of commitment. With these policies in place, however, I think there's much to be gained for our research universities and our nation by the greater emphasis on these activities. The last recommendation I will address before we turn to discussion is in some sense, perhaps for me at least, the most important for the long-term well-being of our nation. It is recommendation 10, the last one in the report, and it says, secure for the United States the full benefits of education for all Americans, including women and underrepresented minorities. While the National Academies report specifically talks about greater participation in the STEM disciplines for these people, for underrepresented minorities, low-income students, and women, I would personally expand that to all undergraduate education. We must embrace efforts to increase the participation and success of underrepresented minorities, first-generation, and low-income students across all academic and professional disciplines. Deep within the makeup of this great nation is the belief that a person's status at birth is not supposed to determine their status throughout life. In today's economy, it's education that provides the most effective, indeed one might say the only reliable path to a successful career and a high quality of life. The numbers speak for themselves, and they speak volumes. An individual with no more than a high school diploma can expect to earn about $1.4 million over the course of a lifetime. With an associate's degree, that individual's lifetime earnings increase to $1.8 million. And with a bachelor's degree, the individual can expect to earn approximately $2.4 million over his or her lifetime. That's a 76% premium between a bachelor's degree holder versus someone with only a high school diploma. This means that in today's America, higher education has become, in effect, the gatekeeper for entry into the middle class and to economic and social stability. Laura Tyson, chair of the Economic Advisors under Council of Economic Advisors under President Clinton, observed recently, and I think this is a very telling comment, the United States is caught in a vicious cycle, largely of its own making. Rising income inequality is breeding more inequality in educational opportunity, which results in greater inequality in educational attainment. That in turn undermines the intergenerational mobility upon which Americans have always prided themselves and perpetuates income inequality from generation to generation. End of quote. We are, in fact, staring at the possible disappearance of the American dream. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, which is the organization for all the major industrialized nations in the world, according to their 2012 Education at a Glance report, which notes that the children of less educated parents in the U.S. have a tougher time climbing the educational ladder than in any other OECD country. The odds that a young person in the U.S. will enroll in college if his or her parents do not have a college degree are nearly the lowest among the OECD countries. It is sobering in the extreme to consider that American child's education achievement is more dependent on the education level of his or her parents than for a child born almost anywhere else in the industrialized world. One of the most disturbing illustrations of how we continue to come up short is found in the recent education trust study called Priced Out. The report notes that if you are a child in the highest quartile of income, you have an 82% chance of getting a college degree. If you are a child in the lowest quartile of income, you have an 8% chance of getting a college degree. So I ask, how in this day and age does a child in poverty move out of poverty if they don't have a college degree? You know, I was really struck by this. I've reached the point where I keep going to 50th reunions of various sorts. So I went to my 50th high school reunion, and truth be known, I've also been to my 50th college reunion. I could now eligible to go to my 50th graduate PhD reunion. But I remember graduating, what my brother did as well, from Henry Clay High School in Lexington, Kentucky. And when we graduated, some of us went to college. Many of us went right into the workplace. They didn't go to college. So we go back to this 50th reunion, and we're all there, and I see my colleagues, my classmates, who had gone straight into the workforce at IBM or some other place, and they are all retired and living in Florida. And here I am still working. But doesn't that say a lot? You can't, that's not going to happen in this day and age. The only way people are going to be able to move into the middle class is through education. In America today, high ability, low income students go to college. This is a stunning statistic. High ability, low income, go to college at the same rate as low ability, high income students. And we're supposed to be a meritocracy. One of the most important things we can do to support participation in higher education by low-income students is to collectively recalibrate our financial aid practices with much greater emphasis on need-based financial aid as opposed to merit-based aid. When I became chancellor in 2002, it was an issue of great concern to me, and so I launched a study of how we were allocating our institutional financial aid, and I found that we were as guilty as the most of having too much of our institutional aid go for merit, trying to buy students who were going to go to college anyway, and leaving needy students who were eligible for admission to work 40 hours a week. And so we actually changed our financial aid policies. Look, some merit aid is always going to be spent, and I understand it, and it's justified. But we instituted a policy that says that low-income students, defined by Pell eligibility, have to graduate from our institutions with debt at a rate that is at least 25% less than the average debt of our graduates. Well, that policy alone has now forces institutions to manage their institutional debt to ensure that increased amounts go to needy students. And in fact, we have seen a significant increase in our institutional need-based aid. Let me just close with a new initiative that I'm very excited about that we are undertaking to provide a better pathway for low-income students to and through a four-year degree. The initiative is called Achieving Collegiate Excellence and Success, or ACES. So students in this program are going to be ACES. It involves a three-way partnership with the local school districts, community colleges, and the University System of Maryland. So the K-12 schools will identify low-income students in the 9th grade who demonstrate college potential. These students will be surrounded with special support services and enrolled in college prep classes. The community colleges will offer college credits courses in the high schools that articulate with degree programs in the University System of Maryland. The initiative is being launched this year in Montgomery County with a goal of enrolling 4,000 students in that county alone. Based on that experience, we intend to roll this initiative out across the state. We know that education beyond high school has the power to propel social mobility. We must open the door of opportunity for all, not just those fortunate enough to win some sort of lottery of birth. We in higher education have the ability and the obligation to reestablish the American dream. So, thank you for the privilege of being with you today. As you can see, I'm quite energized by these activities and initiatives. And I've probably spoken longer than I should, but I hope we have a few minutes, Pat, to take a few questions. Thoughts? Yes.
So first, let me say Richard Lebnier and Al Livingston are both retired, but not living in Florida.
See, they took the less economic advantageous way. They went into academia.
So one of my questions for you is one of the rising costs for higher education is the cost of remedial education,
right?
Especially in mathematics,
right?
Can you talk about your thoughts on how to deal with that?
Yeah. Well, I think the longer term fix to that problem has got to come through something like the Common Core. I don't know whether the Common Core is inside speak or not, but there was this huge. Does everybody know what the Common Core is? Yeah. Okay, so I don't have to talk about the Common Core. So I do think, and I'm quite involved in the rollout of the Common Core through one of the consortia that is going to be doing the testing, and I've become convinced. I wasn't directly involved in it, but I've become convinced that responsible academics believe that the Common Core is a good curriculum, and that it would, if people were successful with it, they would be college ready. And what I'm worried about now is seeing states starting to back away from it. Because guess what? The standards are more rigorous. Students aren't doing as well on the tests. Mom and dad don't like that. They complain to the politicians, and everybody starts wanting to back away from it. We can't let that happen. I go around talking to the business community. If you want to do one thing to advance America, you speak up about the importance of the Common Core. So I think long term, we've got to bring the exit standards in high school closer to the admission expectations in college, and that's how we get away from this remedial education. In the short run, I think there are emerging strategies with remedial education in mathematics that are showing some promise. One of the things we've done at the University of Maryland is get rid of the moniker remedial course. So what the department at Maryland has done at University of Maryland College Park and others across the system is they've taken they build around the remedial work the student needs some credit-bearing material. So the student enters this class, they're doing some remedial work, but they do enough other work to earn a credit or two. And apparently, psychologically, that is a huge factor. The odds of getting, I saw this data, it's unbelievable. The odds of ever graduating from college, if you start with a traditional remedial math course, it's like 1%. Nobody finishes colleges if you have to go through it. So just psychologically, the notion of having a course where you are making some progress towards the degree. So that's one thing. Secondly, and I haven't completely gone over to the dark side, but I do believe that there is some of this intelligent software-driven material can make a huge difference with remedial education. And we've been running some experiments using some of this software material. to get, and it's very personalized. Students can move at their own pace, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there is some value in that. Incidentally, there's a huge editorial in the New York Times, you probably saw it, about mathematics and mathematics education. Yes. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I had a question on your the second recommendation.
Yes.
On the sustained collaboration between universities
And business. Yes.
I guess that things like IP policy, etc., would help in bridging the gap.
Right.
But I see three main issues in terms of a cultural divide between universities and businesses.
Right.
I wanted you to comment on it. One is on the time scale of thinking, in the
Right.
sense that you want a quicker return on investment in.
I'll comment on it, but it's a huge problem. Go ahead.
Second is on the degree of openness in the two cultures.
Right.
Where we build on a network of interactions and build
Right.
upon each other in an open way. And the third is the end goal, which is return for shareholders as opposed to just generating knowledge as fun things. So if we could bridge those three
Yeah.
items. then I
Well,
guess
look, it is that too is a brave new world, and that we're entering here. And the issues you raise are all very, very real. First of all, I see it all the time on the matter of time scale. When we enter into relationships with companies, they're expecting to move. They don't understand shared governance. CEO says something that happens in the corporation. We have processes that we have to follow before we're going to engage in, and that's part of the coming together. And we got to each understand. Yeah, we're going to try to move faster, but you got to understand our world too. We can't do it. We can't. It's not going to work if you're expecting us to make decisions in your normal time frame. So there has to be a meeting of the minds there. I think where universities, and I'm a little bit out of sync with some university presidents, I hope not yours, that I think one mistake universities make is they are too protective of patents. And, we're all waiting around for our Gatorade to happen. And guess what? It's probably not going to happen. So, I think Johns Hopkins, it was a very early mover in creating a much less rigid relationship with companies insisting upon total ownership of the intellectual property. So I think that can be having a more flexible approach in this regard. In part, from the institutional perspective, and maybe this is a stretch, but I do think about it this way. Is University of Delaware a land-grant institution? Yeah. So so is University of Maryland. And what was the founding principle of the land-grant institution? We were partners with the agricultural community. We were using our knowledge, and we were sharing it with the agricultural community so we could produce the food our nation needed. Well, what's the 21st century model of a land grant? We got this great scientific knowledge. Why can't we develop a sort of a practice of greater sharing and collaboration and partnership with the private sector, maybe even built to some extent on the land grant model? We, in fact, have within the university system of Maryland what we call technology extension agents. And they travel around the state. They go meet with companies. And they find out problems they're having that we might be able to solve. They're brought back to the university. We have some seed funding. The corporation or company puts up money. Faculty at the university work with faculty from the company trying to solve this problem. There are agreements on intellectual property that we share, et cetera, et cetera. So I think if we engage business in these conversations, business needs, the corporate world needs us. They don't have the R&D anymore. They've gotten rid of it. And they need, so we bring a lot to the table. So I think that there is an opportunity at this particular time to to forge new kinds of partnerships in a region, and that's what the Academy report is calling for. Yes?
So I mean this not as a hostile question, but as a.
Well, my brother will get on you if it's hostile. He's a big guy, too.
I'm not going to turn around.
Okay.
I don't want to see. But as I listen to, think about the report and the recommendations that you held up and talked about and the examples that you gave, I do wonder, what do we say to humanities faculty at our research universities,
Right.
and particularly in their role as researchers, for the, this vision of the university of the future?
Right. Well, look, that's a whole nother subject, and I was talking about the National Academy of Sciences report, so I'm looking at one small segment, and I share your concern about the state of the humanities, and we got to find other ways in which we are also speaking up. And I don't mean to say that this recommendation or these three things are the total agenda for the university. It's one, it's national, we're research universities, and I was commenting on this particular report because it's fresh in my mind. But I think you raise a very good point. Now, I also think that that the humanities and the arts have the potential to be huge players in sort of this new era of technology-enriched teaching and learning, not to support just science and technology, but to advance the human experience. Before I came up here, I was at our foundation board meeting, and we had a special presentation by a faculty member who's doing unbelievable things in 3D printing. And it was all about art. And it was all about, creating new designs. And, when you think about it, why is the iPhone such a popular device? My understanding is, if hardcore assessment is, there are other devices out there that are better. But some very thoughtful, artistic, creative people designed it in a way that benefits, that makes it a very appealing device. So I am very empathetic to your comment. We can't make the conversations within our universities and our strategic plans all about science and technology. And I plead guilty for having done that today. But look, my father was a historian. And I was debating whether I was going to be an English major or a math major when I was in college. So I understand what you're saying, and we cannot allow, the erosion of the humanities in the pursuit of this just regard to technology. But I do believe that there is that technology and the use of cognitive science and whatnot can be a means of enhancing the humanities and the arts, and not a detriment to it. Yes?
At the risk that I have to wrestle your brother,
Yes.
Fernando, for this.
Yes.
What's your general strategy? When you look at the different components of the National Academy of Sciences
Right.
report and such, I mean, it really talks, in whole, it talks about change.
Right.
So, as a leader of a very large
Okay,
system,
that's a
to
very good
ourselves, What's
question.
your philosophy?
Yeah.
What's your strategy to elicit change? Because
Yes.
it's clearly one of the things that most individuals and most institutions like least.
Yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think, it has become a huge impediment to us in higher education. And, first of all, the fact that we are resistant to change isn't completely bad. In fact, I think it's quite good. We haven't pursued fads over time. And we still have the best universities. We may be having some competition more than we did in the past. We still have the best universities in the world. So, what we're doing is pretty darn good. But I do think that that things are advancing, cognitive science, technology, et cetera, that is going to, and the economic circumstances are changing so dramatically. We do need to adapt and change. And I think it requires a very thoughtful and special brand of leadership within our universities. The idea that you can just, as we all know, mandate on high that we're going to start doing a certain thing just doesn't work. So I'd give you an example of how we sort of approach this within the University System of Maryland. I'm very committed to this course redesign, academic transformation, whatever, and we've done a lot on this. But when we started, I realized that it wasn't going to happen just because some yo-yo in the chancellor's office said everybody should start doing this. So I went to the presidents and I said, listen, all I want is one faculty member from each campus, just one, to agree to let us give him some money, or her, to engage in some sort of curriculum reform and change. This was 6 or 7 years ago. Just one, that's all I want. So we had 12 people who came together, and they all worked on their redesigns, and some of them were spectacularly successful. And we brought them before the Board of Regents, and they got great recognition, and we supported their activity. So then the next year, we put out an RFP. Who would be interested in doing this? Well, we had 3 or 4 from every campus that wanted to do this. And each year it has built up. We certainly are encouraging the kind of activity. We're providing resources to see the funding. We're giving recognition to those who are engaged. Now when we put out an RFP, we can't fund all the people who want to engage in these activities. So, I don't think the kind of change that we see in other sectors of society, it's not going to be at the same pace as will occur in higher education. But I do think that if there isn't some steady, persistent effort to sort of move and adapt with the times, we're going to find our universities that don't do that are going to find themselves in a difficult situation. But it does, your point is well taken, it does have to be done with care and thought and respect for the role of the faculty. Because if the faculty don't buy into it, forget it. It isn't going to happen. And so that's the way we've approached it. Any other questions? Well, you've been a very good and patient audience, and I certainly thank you for the invitation.